After choosing the path of the patriarch, he thought he was destined for a life of aura farming. But that dream is cooked when he finds out he has no talent for the sword. Jim Rukandle is the youngest son of the Rukandle family, a family of exceptional talent and power, dominating the entire world in combat, conquest, and total mind control. So, it only makes sense that our protagonist should be pretty strong, handsome, and famous, but unfortunately for Jim Rukandle, this is only a pipe dream. During a selection ceremony, where the future of a Rukandle child is predicted, Jim Rukandle chose the sword of the family head, predicting that he might have a great future, and even got noticed by a strange, powerful noble. But none of that came to fruition, because in the end Jim Rukandle did not have an ounce of talent for handling the sword. Day after day, he was reminded of his ineptitude and failure as a member of House Rukandle. The worst of it was from his two older brothers, who kept mocking his sincere efforts to practice even with a wooden sword. They laughed at the fact that this was the idiot who had once picked the legendary Barasoda sword during his selection ceremony, and here he was now practicing with an ordinary wooden sword. Of course, any attempt to rebel against his brothers was an utter failure. This time, he is powerless to watch as they break his hopes and dreams, reminding him that talentless, pathetic idiots like him should never be given chances, because it makes them forget their place. But despite all of this, Jim was still convicted to work hard, and ignore his brothers, believing the fruits of his effort would eventually pay off one way or another. However, at 25 years of age, he was once again reminded of his cruel reality, because the Rukandels had decided to finally banish him completely from his family. The only thing his hard work amounted to was saving his life, as the Rukandels were hesitant to kill him after seeing his valiant efforts to at least try and become something. But in this world, results are everything. And the net result was that Jim Rukandle was a talentless hack with no place in the Rukandle family. Freshly banished from the most prestigious house in the world, Jim Rukandle wandered the earth aimlessly for a few months, and eventually met an interesting woman whom he would soon call his master. It was at this time that Jim Rukandle made a discovery. He did have talent. He had talent as a magician. And ironically, magicians were forbidden in the Rukandle family. Jim Rukandle practiced his magic religiously for 3 years, and one fateful evening, he attempted to summon something out of this world. Without warning, a cold darkness poured from his hands into reality. Jim Rukandle felt a chilling presence, and jumped when he turned to gaze upon this strange being in this world of darkness. With frightened eyes and terror at the back of his throat, he asked, "Who are you?" The shadow being considered Jim Rukandle for a moment, and introduced himself as the Great Soderet, the master of all shadows, and the god of darkness. As a reward for summoning him, the Great Soderet proposed a contract between him and Jim Rukandle. The contract terms were as follows. 1. Jim Rukandle would be able to use a fraction of his shadow power. 2. Jim Rukandle would also gain the ability to negate all curses. Suddenly, the shadow being stopped in the middle of his sentence after observing something. In the middle of Jim Rukandle's heart center was a glowing red curse. It seems that a curse has been placed on Jim Rukandle to cut off his talent. In fact, it appears that this curse had been placed on Jim Rukandle ever since he was born by someone who either hated or feared his potential. What? Jim Rukandle could hardly understand what the shadow being was saying, but it explained more about the terrible curse. The name of the curse was the Bladed Illusion. It worked to suppress any swordsmanship talent of its victim. For a Rukandle, this type of curse was basically a death sentence. However, it looks like the elements of the curse were what made it possible for Jim Rukandle to summon the shadow being in the first place. But as promised, the shadow being frees Jim Rukandle from the curse and promises to watch his new swordsmanship efforts from afar. Back in the world of light, Jim Rukandle takes a deep breath to process what has just happened. But he wastes no time in grabbing the nearest sword in the shack and heading outside to test it out. Immediately after his first swing, Jim Rukandle confirmed the shadow being's words. It was as if he were an entirely different person. Every time he swung the sword, he was attaining new heights of swordsmanship. The sword now felt weightless, and an extension of his own arm. Ha ha ha! Jim Rukandle couldn't help but laugh. The worst dunce in the history of the Rukandle family was fighting like a king's guard right now. Next, Jim Rukandle had an interesting idea. Could he stack his magic abilities on top of his new swordsmanship skills? Quickly and effortlessly, he used magic to produce a shield, and next enhanced his sword for a sharper swing as it came down on the earth. It was a success. Jim Rukandle took a deep breath to bask in the glory and self-satisfaction. Finally, after all this time, his hard efforts had paid off. However, while Jim Rukandle continued to polish his new skills in the courtyard, danger was lurking nearby. A few suspicious soldiers crept up towards him. Bang! Jim Rukandle suddenly awoke to a loud scream. feeling a warm, sticky liquid oozing out of his forehead, and disoriented by the heavy scent of blood. When he opened his eyes completely and finally came to, he realized he couldn't move an inch of his body. He continued to lose more blood quickly, and soon Jim Ricandle realized he was about to die. He called out for his master, and even the mysterious shadow being, but no one was here to answer him in these final moments. Jim Ricandle contemplated his miserable death. After all he had gone through, especially after gaining a new ability, he was killed while sleeping? Was the Ricandle family right about him being useless after all? If everything was going to end up like this, maybe he shouldn't have bothered in the first place. Like his brothers said, idiots should never be given chances. Hope was a dangerous thing. A few seconds later, Jim Ricandle died. The end. Oh, apologies. It looks like there's still more to the story. Jim Ricandle awoke again. This time, it was in a place most familiar to him. He recognized many high-ranking members of the Ricandle family. Jim Ricandle is perplexed because he's sure to have died only a few seconds ago. Cheer up, young Master Jim. Jim Ricandle recognized the sweet voice of his childhood nanny, Gilly. Wondering what the hell is going on, he recognizes a few more things. The grass under his feet, his soft hands, his small height, and most of all, straight down the grassy field, was the legendary sword, the Barasoda. The same sword he had picked out during his selection ceremony, as a toddler. Jim Ricandle now understood he had somehow returned to the past as a 1-year-old. Accepting his new reality, he walks up to choose the Barasoda, just as he had done in his previous life. However, with his newfound knowledge of the past, Jim Ricandle planned on making a few changes to the future in this life. After choosing the legendary sword during the selection ceremony, Jim Ricandle's actions draw a mixed reaction of shock, surprise, and envy from the watchful crowd. The head of the family then concludes the ceremony is over, and moves Jim Ricandle to the Storm Castle. 6 years have passed since Jim Ricandle's regression, and now he is 7 years of age. He spends his idle time locked up in the Storm Castle, because the Ricandle family can only permit him to leave when he is 10 years of age. While drearily perusing some books and contemplating his boredom, young Jim Ricandle hears a scream from nearby. "What's wrong?" he asks as he sees a maid cowering over something. It appears that someone has intentionally placed a dead bird in young Jim Ricandle's room. Of course, he already knows the 2 people in the entire castle who could have done this. While thinking of the devils, his brothers walk into the room. They are a bit disappointed that the maid found the dead bird first instead of Jim. The one with the dark spiky hair is called Daytona Ricandle, who is 9 years of age. And the one with the silver spiky hair is Haytona Ricandle, who is also 9. They are both Jim Ricandle's immediate senior brothers, and the same ones who had made his former life a living hell. The 2 brats continue their attempt to torment him, but Jim Ricandle is just appalled. Although he knew these 2 were the worst of the worst, and eventually became murderers when they were adults, he is still shocked that these 9-year-old versions of themselves would go as far as to kill an innocent bird for some sport. For the most part, Jim Ricandle continues to ignore them while they tease him for being the future head of the family because he chose the Barasoda during his selection ceremony. "Speak up." "I can't hear you," laughed Daytona. Eventually, their stupidity reaches a breaking point, and Haytona tries to strike Jim. But Haytona is about to realize that he has crossed paths with the main character of this story. Bam! After effortlessly catching his fists, a wide kick from Jim Ricandle connects with Haytona's chin and knocks him off his feet. The other brat tries to attack as well, but Jim Ricandle barely breaks a sweat in bringing him down too. He unleashes his rage and proceeds to mercilessly beat both brats until they're damn near unconscious. After cheekily warning them to stay out of his sight, someone enters the room after hearing the commotion. What the hell is going on here? A man dressed in a red cloak approaches the scene of the defeated brothers, while Jim Ricandle is quick to disperse the leftover magic in his hands. The man's name is Con, and he is shocked at the sight before him. He rushes to help the twin brothers and demands an explanation. But Jim Ricandle insists that the 2 brothers only fought amongst themselves and collapsed from exhaustion. While Con finds this hard to believe, the gaze in Jim Ricandle's eyes is so powerful that it makes him comply. He requests to take the brothers to a doctor, but Jim firmly refuses. Instead, he orders Con to follow him to a gravesite outside and dump their bodies there. Con expresses concern at just leaving the brothers there alone and under the rain, but Jim is trying to make a point and enact justice for the innocent bird they murdered and brought to his room. Of course, Jim is a young master, so Con has no choice but to do what he says and leave the boys there. But as he watches young Jim Ricandle leave the premises, some suspicious thoughts start swirling in his head. He is convinced that the young Jim Ricandle had been using magic of some sort, because he saw the trace of mana earlier on his hands. Therefore, this is no ordinary matter between brothers. He is committed to treating this issue as urgent and reporting to the head patriarch as soon as possible. From inside the Storm Castle, Jim Ricandle watches with a keen eye as Night Con leaves the premises. Of course, Jim Rukandal expected this, and knows Con will report this incident to his father, the head patriarch of the Rukandal family. This is because Con is not a mere knight. He also serves as an observer and spy for the head patriarch. From the recent incident, Jim Rukandal has been able to learn some important things. One being that he could still use the Shadow Aura ability, which meant that his contract with the Shadow Being was still valid in this new regression. Also, thanks to the contract with the Shadow Being, he must have escaped being placed under the curse that would suppress his swordmanship's talent. Therefore, the man known as the talentless hack in the history of the Rukandals would not exist in this life. Now there was one thing left for Jim Rukandal to do, which was to meet his father. Meanwhile, the Night Con makes his report to the head patriarch. It is impossible to know what the patriarch is thinking, as he only commands Con to assemble the 7 flagbearers of the Rukandal family, and plots to go see young Master Jim Rukandal. After receiving the summons from the head patriarch, the flagbearers of the Rukandal family meet to discuss the intentions of the head patriarch to head to the Storm Castle. Mary Rukandal, number 7 of the Rukandal flagbearers, an aloof woman with a loose mouth, has no frigging clue what's going on. Dyfus Rukandal, number 4 of the Rukandal flagbearers, and a reserved, sophisticated man, thinks it may have something to do with the Torna twins, but he has his doubts. He suggests it may have something to do with Jim Rukandal after all. After all, Jim Rukandal was the child who had chosen the legendary sword Barasoda a few years back. Perhaps something about that child had suddenly piqued the patriarch's interest. However, in the end, there was simply no way to know what he was thinking. "Shush, you two," commanded a woman with silver hair. Luna Rukandal, number 1 of the Rukandal flagbearers, exuding a strict and efficient aura, hushes them both. Mary wonders what could be so useful about Jim Rukandal that their father would have to go see for himself. Meanwhile, back at the Storm Castle, Jim Rukandal's nanny, Gilly, prepares him to meet with the head patriarch. She offers him words of encouragement, but Jim isn't that naive. He knows that the Night Con must have told his father everything he witnessed during the fight with the Torna twins. Therefore, his father must only be coming here to verify the power Con saw for himself. And if Jim Rukandal could truly become useful to the Rukandal clan after all. When the patriarch arrives at the Storm Castle, he immediately summons the Torna twins, Haytona and Daytona. He barks at them to explain their side of the story regarding the altercation with Jim. Of course, these brats quickly explained that Jim had rendered them unconscious without mercy, and conveniently left out their provocations from earlier. They warned the patriarch of the strange power our main character had used, and reminded him that magic was forbidden in the family. They urged their father to quickly prosecute Jim, but it's obvious to everyone that they're the deplorable ones at fault here. The patriarch gets tired of their bitching and moaning, and urges them to get good, or else they have no chance of surviving the Rukandal family. After expelling the tiny brats, the patriarch calls for Jim. Before the meeting, Jim recollects everything he knows about the head patriarch, the man who was his father. The name of the patriarch was Chiron Rukandal. Not only was he the strongest in the entire Rukandal clan, but he also held the title of the strongest in today's time, Genesis Knight. Obviously, the patriarch was no ordinary man, and it is said that after achieving his status of Genesis Knight, he disposed of all his earthly emotions and became a being with a singular focus on improving the prosperity of the Rukandal family. This was the man who was his father. If Jim Rukandal were to compare his past self to someone like that, he would be less than a nobody. But this time it was different. In this life, I'll make sure no one will ever disregard me. And with that, he pushed open the doors to the courtroom and greeted the great being that was his father. "I greet the patriarch," bowed Jim Rukandal. Shocked by the choice of words from a 7-year-old boy, Chiron Rukandal questions why Jim does not address him as father. Jim gives a weird smart-ass answer of treating the patriarch's visit as an official one instead of a filial meeting. After this brief bout of ass-kissing, Chiron demands Jim tell his side of the story in the incident with his senior brothers. Jim answers confidently that he was only looking for revenge. After all, one of the Rukandal's family core principles was to dish out what the subject had received, whether it be in good faith or bad. Meanwhile, it looks like Mary may be getting too interested in listening to the boy's answers. After deliberating for a moment, the patriarch suddenly orders everyone in the room besides Jim to leave immediately. They follow the patriarch's instruction without quarrel, with Mary silently rooting for her little brother, scoring a one-on-one talk with the great Chiron himself. Chiron gets straight to it as soon as the room is empty. He immediately instructs Jim Rakandal to illustrate the strange special power Con the Knight had witnessed that day. But he warns Jim once again that magic is strictly forbidden in the Rakandal family. This is because dabbling in magic will often result in the subject being unable to reach the pinnacle of his swordsmanship. Therefore, if the strange power Jim possessed was indeed magic, there would be some trouble awaiting him in his future. Jim contemplates whether it is wise to truly reveal his power right here and now. But knowing the head patriarch, he would absolutely not let this go until he knows the full extent of Jim's new abilities. Jim Rakandal takes this chance to do a bit of aura farming and lets the power of the shadow being leak out. At once, it is apparent to Chiron that this is neither magic nor aura. Instead, it is the true ability of the one who founded the Rakandal family in the first place. Chiron knew this strange new ability as shadow energy. It was the latent energy present in the legendary sword Barasoda, once wielded by the founder of the Rakandal family. Does this mean this child is destined to be the head of the Rakandal family after all? Wondered Chiron. Jim Rakandal is surprised by the hint of recognition in his father's eyes, and prods him for more questions. Chiron Rakandal confesses that he indeed knew of Jim's newfound ability, and the fact that it belonged to the powerful shadow god named Soderet. Soderet had once made a contract with the founding father of the Rakandal family, Lord Timar, and thus had remained within the presence of the family. However, shortly after Lord Timar had passed away, so did Soderet, and the power was lost forever. Or so they thought. Because now, it looked like the god of shadows was once again trying to make contact with the Rakandal family through Jim himself. Curious about another little detail, Jim asks another question. Between you and the shadow god, who is stronger, father? Chiron Rakandal takes a moment to respond before giving a terrifying answer. I don't know, since I have never fought a god before. Jim Rakandal takes a moment to admire Chicken's cheeky answer before he gets asked a question of his own. Chiron explicitly asks Jim Rakandal how he intends to utilize his new strange ability. Jim gives the politically correct answer of using his new ability for the Rakandal family, but Chiron easily sees through the obvious lie. After all, Jim had mercilessly beaten his elder brothers and thrown them out in the storm. Those were the actions of an obviously vengeful person. Jim has no other choice but to reveal the truth to his father, that he intended to keep this power all for himself. His answer satisfies the man called Chiron Rakandal, who promises to keep a close watch on Jim from now on. Pleased with the progress of things, and given that he has his father's approval to do as he wishes, Jim can't help but reflect on how different this life truly was from his previous one. Outside the Storm Castle, Mary Rakandal presents a mysterious gift to the young Jim Rakandal. Aside from advising Jim to boil and eat it thoroughly, she gives no further explanation and disappears with the rest of the flag-bearers. Jim wonders about the new gift from his sister, and quickly opens the parcel to find that it's a phoenix heart. A phoenix heart was a necessary item required to summon a fully grown phoenix. Truly, for Mary Rakandal to hand this to a 7-year-old child, she must be certifiably insane. And from what he knew of Mary Rakandal, she just might be. Mary Rakandal was a 6-star knight and the 7th flag-bearer of the Rakandal family. She generally went by the name Wind Fury, but she had another quite infamous name, earned by her bloodthirsty cravings for battle, the Madwoman of the southern region. Besides its summoning abilities, the Phoenix Heart also granted a resistance to fire and promoted growth at a young age. It was obvious that Mary Rakandal was testing Jim Rakandal. Or rather, she was fattening him up to become a worthy rival for her bloodthirsty ambitions in the future. Although the possibility of being able to grow strong and summon a phoenix with his own hands in the future excited Jim Rakandal, this backhanded gesture from his elder sister made him feel uneasy. While getting ready to devour the valuable item that had been prepared by Gilly, Jim notices something odd and orders his elder twin brothers to reveal themselves from hiding. These brats dared to shamelessly beg for food in Jim Rakandal's presence, but that was no problem. In fact, Jim Rakandal had been waiting for a moment like this after all. He promises to give his brothers a portion of the Phoenix Heart soup, provided that they do something for him in return. A few moments later, the twin brothers are seen excavating some sort of strange mine outside the premises of the Storm Castle. Bitching and moaning as always, the twins wonder if they would get in trouble if someone saw them excavating a frigging mine, but they soon pushed that thought aside. It would all be worth it once they get to eat the chicken soup. Besides, They were a little scared of Jim Racandle, as he was now. Meanwhile, right under their excavation activities, was a strange man incubated in a lab. Desperate for the promised soup, the twins finish up the task and quickly return to the Storm Castle, looking like little orphan boys. Of course, the young Master Jim Racandle always keeps his promises and offers them their splendid reward: 2 teaspoons of the amazing Phoenix Heart soup. After all, Jim had promised to give them some of the soup, but the amount was never specified. He leaves his brothers to enjoy the feast, while he heads out to the site of their excavation. Examining the depth of the hole, Jim is surprised to discover his twin brothers did an excellent job despite their rotten attitudes. He examines the thickness of the entrance and decides to blast it apart with some 1-star magic this time. Ever since he had regressed into this new life, he had been holding in his magic to prevent it from being discovered by the rest of the Racandle family. Besides, it felt good to unleash the mana that had been building up within him as well. The destruction of the outer shell is successful, and confirms that Jim Racandle can still use his magic in this regressed life. Inside the location of this strange place is Racandle's secret storage. Jim Racandle had never dared to visit this place in his previous life, but the location was revealed to him by his older brother in a passing conversation. His older brother had also noted that the secret storage could only be opened with a secure password. Racandle's child is here to console me rockin'. And with that, the steel gates to the secret storage swung open for Jim Racandle. This secret storage served as a collection of family secrets and techniques that the Racandle clan had defeated in the past millennia. It was a wide room with thousands of entries. Usually, entrance is only granted to a flag bearer like his sister Mary, but Jim Racandle's newfound abilities gave him more than enough disposition to put this place to good use. Suddenly, he spots something in the middle of the room. The strange figure from earlier, contained in a bottle of liquid. Upon closer inspection, Jim finds that the life form has a mixture of skin and scales on its surface, begging the question of whether it was really human. Immediately, something clicks in Jim's mind. He whispers into the quiet night, "Racandle's child is here to console me rockin'." Could it be that this life form in the bottle of liquid is Miroccan? The Black Dragon Miroccan? According to the legends from his childhood, the Black Dragon Miroccan was defeated by the first flag-bearer and went into a deep slumber. Could it be those stories were actually real? But Jim Racandle didn't have further time for this. He had to learn as many family secrets as possible from this storage location, so he could grow even stronger. After stealing a few difficult 3-star magic books, he decides it would be much more practical to copy them instead and avoid getting caught. So it was for several months, Jim Racandle ventured down to the secret storage to copy the precious family secrets and back. However, one fateful night, an eerie sound stirred within the secret storage. When he approached to get a closer look, he came face to face with the life form known as Miroccan, staring him down from head to toe. "What hell are you?" barked the ancient life form. Panic seized the heart of young Master Jim Racandle. Something like this had never happened in his past life. But he calmly introduced himself as the young heir of the Racandle family. After all, Miroccan was said to be the longtime guardian of the Racandle family, so there was a low probability that the life form would end up hurting him. However, the result is quite unexpected. The dragon known as Miroccan loses his patience at being called a mere guardian by young Jim Racandle, lamenting the fact that the Racandle family had been shortchanging his reputation all these years. When he finally regains his composure, he is appalled to see that Jim Racandle is only a mere child, and wonders why he smells so strongly of shadow energy. After all, the last time he smelled shadow energy this strong, it came from the founder of the Racandle family, Lord Timar. From this piece of information, young Jim Racandle realizes that the reason Miroccan woke up from his deep slumber must have been because of the shadow energy he now possessed. To test this theory, Jim once again demonstrates the power of the shadow god, Soderet. Meanwhile, Miroccan only looks crestfallen from this new discovery. He can't believe that the promised 1,000-year contract between him and Soderet rested in this little child. Regardless, he decides to do the proper thing and introduce himself formally to young Master Jim Racandle. Miroccan introduces himself as Soderet's friend and the last descendant of the first shadow creation. According to the rules of the 1,000-year contract between him and Soderet, Miroccan is now eternally bound to stay by young Jim Racandle's side. Jim introduces himself as the 13th son of the Racandle family, and the two form a hasty partnership. In the coming weeks and months, Jim bribes the dragon Miroccan with snacks to answer more of his questions in the secret storage facility. One of the first questions is, why did the dragon have a fight with the founder of the Rukandal family? That was 1,000 years ago. How the hell would I remember that? He says while ordering Jim to bring more of the snacks. Later, the dragon Murokan inquires more about his intentions with the secret storage facility. Jim confesses that he intends to learn as much as possible by transcribing the ancient family texts down here and getting as strong as possible. But do you really understand anything? Asked the dragon, because after all, to him, Jim was still a 7-year-old child. Jim confirms he understands about 30% of all the texts, which was impressive to the dragon. However, Jim is very unsatisfied with his progress. Barring the fact that this was indeed his second life, he was still a Rukandal. Something like this should come easily to him, and yet it was difficult. He was the youngest out of 13 children, and there was also his father, his mother, and other elders in the clan to compete with. If he were to become extraordinary enough to beat these people, he had to work much, much harder. He asks the dragon how much he compares to the original founder of the Rukandal clan, and how quickly the founder would have been able to understand these books down in the secret storage. The dragon replied that the founder, Lord Timar, would have probably not been able to understand a single line of text at Jim Rukandal's age. There was also the fact that the question was based on a pointless logic. After all, strictly reading books and practicing theory were not a requirement to get stronger in battle. You have potential, but obviously you're not as good as the founder. Young Jim Rukandal looks crestfallen, but the dragon encourages him by praising his other qualities. For one, Jim Rukandal had a contract with the God of Shadows, just like the founder did. The God of Shadows was a powerful being, and it was said that its power was infinite. That would suggest that now, Jim Rukandal's power might have no limit as well. Also, there was the fact that Jim was smart enough to understand what was in the ancient texts as well. With these two qualities, who knows, Jim might one day even surpass the founder if he trained diligently. In fact, to cheer him up, the dragon offered to teach him a new technique called shadow energy liberation. The dragon explains that this technique is the beginning and end of using shadow energy, but also quite dangerous, so Jim Rukandal should comply with his instructions slowly and carefully. Jim is ever ready to obey, but when the dragon explains the fundamentals of the technique, Jim is stunned. Apparently, before using shadow energy liberation, one had to master the art of opening and moving your mana levels with expert proficiency, but that was such a basic method that Jim already achieved in his previous life. In addition, the dragon insisted that it would take 2 years to master this preliminary art, but it had taken Jim less than half that time in his previous life. While the dragon continues yapping about his so-called profound knowledge, Jim effortlessly forms a Rasengan on one hand. All done. Can you teach me shadow energy liberation now? He asks with a bored expression. The dragon is stunned that Jim can create such an effortless Rasengan from just manipulating his mana, but Jim refrains from telling it that he had regressed from a past life before. The dragon is convinced by his skill and agrees to reveal the secrets of shadow energy liberation. The dragon starts with a simple lecture. All the shadows in this world were born from the shadow god. This means that the shadow god Soderet is the owner of every single shadow on Earth. Black clouds emanate from everywhere all at once, all sweeping, pooling into the center of the room. Jim Rukandal observes this phenomenon with wonder and terror in his eyes. As you are the sole contractor of the shadow god, it means you too can become the owner of every blessed shadow in this world. The mighty shadows swell and crash and spin and finally converge at the soles of the dragon's feet, exuding dark, dangerous power. This is shadow energy liberation, roared the dragon. The terror and wonder in Jim Rukandal's eyes changed to anticipation for the future. Meanwhile, somewhere else in this world, the first flagbearer of the Rukandal family, Lady Luna Rukandal, attends to some personal matters of her own. She wonders what to bring as a present for her promising little brother. Six months after the incident at the secret storage facility, the Tonner twins have come of age to leave Storm Castle. Things have cooled down between the twins and the young Master Jim Rukandal, as they can say their goodbyes with no ill will toward one another. A few days later, it is Jim Rukandal's 9th birthday, and Gilly has baked a cake to celebrate. While they discuss the logistics of the birthday cake delivery, the night con interrupts to announce that the young master has a surprise visitor, Mistress Luna Rukandal, the first flag-bearer of the Rukandal clan, and the eldest out of the 13 siblings of Rukandal. In his previous life, Jim had known Luna Rukandal to naturally be the strongest out of all 13 siblings, and was given the nickname, the White Whale of Rukandal. She lived a quiet existence and kept to herself most times, and had even stepped out of the succession war to ascend to the level of the patriarchy. The name, White Whale, truly suited her, as she kept everyone at arm's length and walked alone most of the time. Because of this, the relationship he had with Mary in his previous life was more akin to that of a stranger than family. So why is it that she had decided to come to Storm Castle and see him now, without so much as an announcement? Did she find out something from the patriarchy? Or could it be that young Master Jim Rukandal had been caught going to the forbidden secret storage facility? They exchanged polite greetings, with Mistress Cuna explaining there was no urgent matter besides just wanting to check up on her youngest brother. However, Jim confesses that he is quite anxious and stunned, as Luna had never done this sort of thing before, combined with the fact that she had such an intimidating presence. The Mistress Luna is crestfallen to see that her brother had put up a kind of guard against such a simple personal affection like this. But after all, she couldn't blame him. It was the nature of the Rukandal siblings to cheat, betray, backstab, and constantly compete against each other in this fierce environment. And Jim was playing into that stereotype, so he could protect himself. Luna apologizes for the effect of her sudden presence, but urges to speak with him privately and immediately. Jim judges his eldest sister's intentions to be genuine, so he agrees. Later, they enter the drawing room alone, and Luna gets down to brass tacks without a second's delay. She reminds Jim Rukandal about the incident with their father a few months ago. Things had gone well, and the patriarch had taken an interest in him, but so did the other siblings in the Rukandal family. This means that the moment Jim comes of age to leave Storm Castle, events will begin to heat up for him. When that time comes, she warns Jim to stay away from the rest of the flagbearers and avoid getting dragged into the succession war for the patriarchy. Jim Rukandal cannot be more stunned. Mistress Luna Rukandal was the strongest out of all the flagbearers, and yet, the reason she gave up on becoming the patriarch was for such a trivial reason as this? Another thing came to the young master's mind. Why hadn't Mistress Luna ever warned him about this in his previous life? Was it because he was a talentless hack that would have eventually gone nowhere in the succession war? The feeling was like a knife being twisted in young Jim Rukandal's stomach. He opens his mouth and says, "Thank you for your concern, but there's no way in hell I'm sitting out this fight." The Mistress Luna shakes her head and beckons him to listen to her. She insists she's not making things up just so he doesn't become her competition. But Jim Rukandal has another pressing reason why he can't back down. And the reason was the curse that had been placed on him in his previous life. For a Rukandal that had to grow up and excel in the way of the sword at all costs, the curse that had prevented him from getting stronger in his previous life was as good as an assassination attempt. Most likely, the culprit had tried to curse him in this life too, but the power of the shadow being had negated it for the second time. There was no way he was going to let the culprit who did this get away with it. Of course, he spares most of the details while telling Mistress Luna about this. All she knows is that he survived an assassination attempt. But that is enough for her to bring a storm into the drawing room. With the power of darkness on her side, she demands that Jim tell her who dared to kill him in this house. Jim tries to calm her sister down, but Luna is already heartbroken that he has been dragged into this mess. It is interesting for Jim Rukandal to know his firm sister had such a tender heart. Soon, Mystery Luna Rukandal changes the subject and confesses she was here for another reason entirely, to deliver Jim's birthday present. She opens a box to reveal a small pendant that was the color of the ocean. She places the pendant around his neck and instructs him to break it only in the worst emergencies, and then she could come to him no matter where he was in this world. Therefore, it was crucial for him to wear it at all times. After handing over the gift, the Mistress Luna stays a bit for some cake logistics before taking her leave. Later that night at the storage facility, the Dragon Muroccan questions young Jim Rukandal about the origin of the pendant presented by Mistress Luna. The dragon claims that the pendant is of impossible importance, as just a few thousand years ago, millions of people had risked their lives for such an artifact. Apparently, it was an artifact of Demon King Orgel, and its abilities included enhancing the user's magic, water resistance to attack magic of 5 stars and below, and even summoning magic. Of course, the Dragon Muroccan knows all about this because he was alive and active during that time period. Therefore, Whosoever bestowed such a gift on young Jim must care about him a lot. Not just that, she must be incredibly strong too. Jim Rakandal agrees with the dragon while handing him his allocated donuts for the day, and tells him of his elder sister, Mistress Luna. The dragon wonders if Mistress Luna was the strong person who just left the Storm Castle, and Jim is quite shocked to learn that the dragon Murokan had sensed his sister's presence, especially all the way from the storage facility. Not only that, the dragon reveals that Mistress Luna must have sensed his presence as well. Jim goes into a flight of panic, wondering if Luna won't report anything to the Patriarchy. The penalty for breaking into the storage facility could be death. However, the dragon explains that the young master is being irrational. Mistress Luna was someone who gave Jim that valuable pendant after all. Why would she tell on her youngest brother and leave him to die? It should be obvious that Mistress Luna Rakandal is someone whom Jim could trust at this point. Indeed, Mistress Luna had sensed the dragon's presence underground, but she decides to say nothing. It looks like the young Jim Rakandal has found a trustworthy ally. A year later, Jim Rakandal is now 10 years old, and has begun preparations to leave the Storm Castle, one of which is sparring with a trainer designated from the Rakandal Patriarchy. Jim Rakandal engages his teacher with fierce combat, shattering the perception of being just a defenseless young swordsman. Of course, the teacher had expected this because Jim had caught the interest of the Patriarch after all. However, Jim's combat was simply too overwhelming for his age. Instead of the teacher assessing Jim's sparring abilities, it felt like the other way around. It was as if Jim himself was assessing the competence of this new teacher. At the end of their training session, the teacher assures Jim that he would do everything in his power to train him properly until he graduates into the Storm Castle, to which Jim is very grateful. Later, Jim plays with a candlelit fire in his bedroom. He is elated to discover that the qualities of eating the phoenix heart that Mary Rakandal gifted him are showing, as the candlelit fire no longer feels hot, but instead lukewarm to the touch. His nanny, Gilly, is fascinated by this new ability as she had only heard about it in stories, and so had Jim. However, this was just the beginning. After all, Jim Rakandal hadn't completely absorbed the heart. It was only half absorbed right about now. In a few more years, when he's absorbed everything, his abilities should grow to even more terrifying heights. Meanwhile, Gilly packs his things for travel, as they would be leaving Storm Castle the very next morning. Jim is quick to instruct that she doesn't forget about his special books, the ones he had been using to transcribe the ancient texts from the secret storage facility underground. As Gilly offers him to prepare a snack, the conversation reminds young Master Jim of something incredibly important. He excuses himself and heads straight to the secret storage facility to find the dragon Murokan. He reminds the dragon that they would be leaving Storm Castle the next morning. So what was the plan? The dragon Murokan was going to come with him, right? Of course. It turns out the dragon had been waiting for this day anxiously as well. But Jim Rakandal wondered how the hell they were going to move him. He was a mighty dragon with a great presence. But the dragon assures him that it is a trivial matter for such a being as himself. Even though he had become weak, he had enough power to hide his existence and follow Jim Rakandal to the castle. But Jim Rakandal is shocked to find out that the dragon's powers have become weak in the first place. How did this happen? There's no way I would be fine after doing nothing but sleep for 1,000 years, argued the dragon Murokan. Jim then wonders if the dragon would ever regain his lost powers, and the answer is simple. It is possible, but Jim Rakandal will have to do his part in getting much, much stronger, because when Jim Rakandal grows in strength, the dragon Murokan will too, since he is a guardian dragon to the young master. The dragon Murokan urges the young master to become a strong magic swordsman quickly, just like the founder of the Rakandal clan. A magic swordsman? Jim Rakandal was stunned to learn from the shadow being that the founder of the Rakandal family had been a magic swordsman, especially because using magic as a swordsman in the Rakandal family was explicitly forbidden right now. The dragon Murokan explains that the only reason the Rakandal clan forbade magic to chase swordsmanship was due to a humiliating vow they signed 1,000 years ago. The dragon was the supposed guardian of the family, but even if he were to declare his presence to the rest of the Rakandals, they would surely not be happy to welcome him. But if it were 1,000 years ago, both he and young Master Jim would be worshipped as heroes instead of living in hiding, although Jim believes that is a bit of exaggeration for the stuck-up Rakandal family. There was another problem, though. Even if the dragon Murokan could follow Jim Rakandal undetected, Someone surely would come to the secret storage facility to find that the dragon's tank was empty. What then? The dragon assures Jim that he was capable of casting some illusion magic to cover their tracks. But Jim doubts this statement. Didn't the dragon just mention he was weak a few seconds ago? The dragon is insulted by this lack of faith in his ability, but reassures the young cheeky master that he would do his best in maintaining the illusion as he grows stronger every day. Satisfied by this turn of events, the young master gifts the dragon Muraka some fun drinks and an assortment of cookies for his hard work. The dragon Murakan believes he has attained heaven in this lifetime, and gives thanks for the glorious food. The next morning, Gilly prepares Jim Rakandal for the journey ahead. Like Mistress Luna had done a few years ago, she warns him that things are about to become wildly different once they leave Storm Castle. She would not be allowed to bake him snacks anymore, and the lazy atmosphere they shared together would be a thing of the past. But she remained committed to serving the young master through thick and thin. 2 guardian knights named Jerome and Holt arrived to escort Jim Rakandal to the main castle, the Garden of Swords. The date is October 30th, 1970. The day Jim Rakandal approaches the main castle of the Rakandal clan. The carriage ride proceeds smoothly, but Gilly is worried about the snow outside. If the snow continued to pile down like this, it meant stopping at a nearby village to wait it out, as the teleportation gate they planned to use would be inoperable during heavy snow conditions. Suddenly, a loud sound crashes against the carriage, causing the young master to topple over. Gilly holds Jim Rakandal close while the knights instruct them to stay inside the carriage. It appears that they are under attack. Gilly surveys the situation with her superhuman senses, and concludes that their enemies are about a dozen in number, comprising mages, warriors, and even possibly archers. But she assures young Jim Rakandal that everything will be well, as the knights protecting them right now are of 7-star level. But something else clicks in Jim Rakandal's head. "We need to get out of the carriage right now," he barks. Gilly is stunned, but Jim Rakandal explains a simple fact. The Rakandal Guardian Knights were bound by duty to stay by a Rakandal's side no matter the circumstance. So why was the first instinct of their Guardian Knights to run out of the carriage in the first place? One of them should have stayed back in the carriage to protect him. Gilly realizes that the young master is right. This meant that someone among their Guardian Knights was a traitor, or perhaps they were just fake knights in the first place. Therefore, they had to leave this carriage as soon as possible. Gilly understands the situation, and immediately equips some badass Wolverine claws to break them both out of the carriage. She runs with the young master into the forest of icy weather, and apologizes for using such force in front of him. However, Jim believes her priorities are misplaced right now. What she should be doing is taking him to the scene of battle. Gilly wonders about the reason for this line of thinking, and Jim Rakandal explains something simple. If the knights that had carried them up until this point were the enemies, that means that the other guys could be the allies of young Jim Rakandal. Gilly accepts the young master's wisdom, and soon transports him to the scene of battle. They arrive to see a slew of warriors actively looking for the young master. From the badges on their uniforms, it was plain to see that these warriors were a coalition of 2 groups. The Yuta family from the Mattel family of magic, and the Black King squad from the mercenary group. The 2 groups soon find Gilly and the young master, and just as expected, it turns out that these 2 groups were actively looking for the young master Jim Rakandal to protect him from the 2 fake knights. It is obvious they were fake knights and not traitors for a simple reason. Jerome and Holt were supposedly strong enough to be 7-star knights, but such 7-star knights would not struggle against this level of resistance. Therefore, they were fake knights. They quickly corner the fake knights, with Gilly demanding to know who exactly they were working for to target the young master like this. Not surprisingly, they refuse to talk, and Gilly asks Jim Rakandal what should be done about these mysterious enemies. "Kill the first one, and bring the severed arm of the other," replied Jim Rakandal coldly. Gilly jumps into battle with her master's orders. She kills Jerome without even breaking a sweat, and cuts off Holtz's arm before he can blink twice. Holtz doesn't give up and tries to bring Gilly down with his right arm, but in a split second, it's all over. As Gilly drags the humiliated knight to his doom, Jim Rakandal explains something crucial. The masters who sent these fake knights must have truly underestimated their opponents, because Gilly was in fact a 7-star knight. After all, being a 7-star warrior was the minimum requirement to become a nanny for a Rakandal child. If they had wanted to kill him properly, they should have sent knights above the 8-star level. But the fallen knight doesn't stop babbling. He warns Jim Rakandal that this was only the first step. that soon, the reign of the Rookandals would eventually come to an end. This statement is amusing to Jim Rookandal, because he wanted something similar as well. Jim wanted to end the reign of the current Rookandals, and instead begin the era of himself as head of the Rookandals. In a bit of frustration, the fallen knight mentions the name of his master, Zippel. Jim Rookandal was familiar with that family name. The Zippels were renowned magic rulers who conquered the other half of the world. Unlike Rookandals that pursued the heights of swordsmanship, the Zippels pursued the absolute height of magic. It is said that 1,000 years ago, after the death of the founder of the Rookandal clan, Zippel imposed such a humiliating vow on the Rookandals that sealed all their magical abilities. Therefore, the Zippels had come to be the Rookandals' worst enemy. But looking at the fallen knight below, this pathetic guy and his master were only followers of Zippel at best, and not even worth interrogating. Although the pathetic knight begged for death, Jim Rookandal instructs Gilly to throw this guy away somewhere and forget him forever. Something else bothers young Jim Rookandal. The fact that the fake knights were able to deceive the well-trained eyes of Gilly, who was a 7-star warrior. This feat might suggest there was someone else involved in this, a familiar piece of trash that Jim Rookandal had known in his previous life. Later, Gilly reports that the pathetic knights have been properly disposed of. Jim Rookandal nods with approval and approaches the captain of the Black King squad, Murika, and thanks him for his efforts. The young master promises to reward him properly upon getting to the main castle, and urges him to guide them for the rest of the journey. This all sounds fine to the captain, but something about Jim Rookandal's demeanor makes him quite uneasy. The young master's confident and brazen attitude seems to be too mature for a 10-year-old kid. Plus, had what Jim Rookandal said to that fake knight been the truth after all? Was this young Rookandal really keen on snatching the family power all for himself? It definitely seemed so. Sensing the young master's resolve, the captain quickly turns to his squad and warns them against doing anything reckless in front of Jim Rookandal. The crew is insulted that their captain would issue such an instruction, but only Murika was aware that something disastrous might happen if they stepped out of line before the boy known as Jim Rookandal. Finally, it's time to start heading for the teleportation gate again. On the way, Murika wonders if it is alright to leave that last night alive. Jim Rookandal answers affirmatively, because alive or dead, the sight of what happened to those fake knights would serve as a warning for those who wished to follow them. Jim turns to thank Gilly for her efforts, but chastises her self-criticism of what happened. After all, what happened to the carriage was none of her fault. Con, who had sent those knights in the first place, had no idea something was wrong, so she couldn't be blamed for anything in the end. Compared to Con, Gilly was only a 7-star knight, while Con was a 9-star warrior. There was no way for her to know those fake knights were fakes in the first place. Gilly apologizes for her actions, while Jim does a bit of reflection. Gilly's behavior is no different from his previous life. The relationship between a Rookandal child and his nanny was bound by fate. This meant any ridicule or fame achieved by the Rookandal child would most certainly reflect on the nanny. So when Jim Rookandal was a talentless hack in his previous life, Gilly was also ostracized and despised for being useless herself. In fact, on the day that Jim Rookandal was eventually banished from the Rookandal clan, Gilly was banished alongside him as well. But after all that, she never once resented the young master for it. Instead, she took it all upon herself and apologized to Jim Rookandal for being unable to serve him to the best of her ability. Because of this behavior, Jim Rookandal is hesitant to be harsh towards her in this life, but to face what was ahead, he had to be strict enough to harden Gilly's character. Gilly was his personal guardian knight, which meant that if she kept room for such trivial things in the back of her head, it could affect both of them negatively in the future. Therefore, he gives an official order to Gilly. Under no circumstances was she to blame herself for what happened, to which Gilly gladly obeys. The procession finally arrived at a nearby village. This gives Jim Rookandal a bit of time to contemplate the carriage incident, specifically about how the fake knights were able to fool everyone so easily. There was one individual who was capable of performing such an incredible feat. Bubert Gaston, the transformation sorcerer. Bubert Gaston was a noteworthy name in the world of sorcerers because he had perfected transformation magic. Transformation was a magic skill that dragons were usually excellent at, but even dragons are incapable of a perfect transformation. Bubert Gaston was the only being in existence capable of something like this, a skill which he had used to wreak countless havoc and crimes by impersonating others in the modern world. Indeed, it would be very bad if Bubert Gaston had become involved in a plot to destroy the young Jim Racandle. The magician was a troublesome personality, but maybe there was an opportunity here. In his previous life, the magician had been arrested by the Racandle family. Perhaps in this life, it was possible to make him an ally, but perhaps it was not a wise decision to trust someone who had nearly killed him. All this aura farming is making the young master quite sleepy, so he takes a quick nap and wakes up to see a black cat by the window. But it turns out that the nosy cat is only the dragon Murokan in disguise, who is upset because he had been running quite a difficult distance to catch up to the young master and the rest of the crew. The dragon Murokan, last of his name, the exalted guardian dragon of the Racandle family, trips on a piece of floorboard and bangs his royal forehead on the windowsill. Gilly immediately barges into the room after hearing the loud bang, and finds the dragon Murokan squatting with a massive concussion. Gilly activates her combat mode and threatens to shred this weird existence into 1,000 pieces if he doesn't start talking. Their scuffle causes a commotion, but when the dragon Murokan learns that the woman before him is the famous nanny who had been preparing the snacks in Storm Castle, he proposes to give her his heart. Later, the young Master Jim introduces his two guardians to each other. Gilly is polite and quick to apologize for any atrocities committed towards the guardian dragon of the Racandle family. However, the dragon Murokan bears no ill will, and all is forgiven. In fact, he insists on calling Gilly his strawberry. Gilly wonders about this strange behavior, but learns that the young master had been sneaking the snacks she kept making for him to the dragon Murokan. As Jim Racandle continues to explain the rest of the story, Gilly is quite stunned that there is so much she doesn't know about her young master, even though he had always been an exceptional child. But she takes no offense. Instead, she's proud that Jim has already achieved so much at his age. But Jim warns about leaking the rest of this information to anyone else who wasn't in this room, and instructs her to keep a low profile, which she understands and obeys. The dragon Murokan interferes with their conversation again, and Gilly wonders if this bumbling dragon can really be trusted in the long run. A while later, the rest of the squad arrives at the teleportation gate in Mittel. Young Jim Racandle thanks the captain for bringing them this far, and intends on honoring his promise that they are paid handsomely for their hard work. The captain is quite grateful for the experience overall, but wonders how the yellow-eyed cat on Jim's shoulder got there in the first place. The squad captain has a question for Gilly. It turns out that Gilly's last name was Mcloran, and she had been a talented and avid fighter for the Mcloran family, and even skilled enough to become a 7-star warrior. So why was it that she abandoned the Mcloran family and settled for being a nanny in the Racandle family? Gilly declines to respond to such a question, with her eyes telling the captain to shut the hell up and mind his own business. Knowing how to take a hint, the captain bids the Racandles farewell. Inside the teleportation gate, an attendant asks for identification for the two travelers. Gilly presents a black dagger with the Racandle family crest, and the attendant swiftly escorts the travelers to their premium seats. They get to a wide hall with a single sofa in the middle. The attendant explains that they will be at the destination in about 2 hours. It appears that this entire tower was about to teleport to the destination. Meanwhile, Gilly expresses some concern over the new information she's just learned. Even if they were able to pass and hide the existence of the dragon Murokan, it would be exceedingly difficult to hide the presence of the young master's magic in the main castle. But the young Master Jim assures her that nothing would go wrong, because he had already thought of that. Before he can explain more about the details, some new guests arrive at the teleportation gate. A boy with silver hair and the mark of a golden dragon on her cloak. The mark of the golden dragon represented the Zippel family, Racandle's worst enemies. The new guests sit just across from the young master, and he has a nagging feeling he's met this person with silver hair before. The boy expresses disgust at seeing such a brat in the same tower as him, but he warms up a bit to the dragon Murokan in his cat form. Of course, the cat is less than excited to be associated with the enemy. The boy's name is Veridon Zippel, and in truth, he had been trying to cause a commotion in the hall, but he is stunned to see that the young Jim Racandle had remained quite calm throughout. He approaches them to introduce himself and apologize. Immediately, the young master remembers the name from his previous life. Veridon Zippel was a genius of the Zippel family. As a potential heir and model character to all magicians, Jim Racandle had once felt that this person was a being of a level he could never reach. But how about now? The young Master Jim was interested in knowing how they would compare in terms of skill. He cheekily responds that Veridon was at least not a complete idiot. Veridon was smart enough to know that that if the Zippel guards had attacked them, they would have quickly been turned into minced meat. The boy applauds Jim Racandle for his jokes, but soon it becomes abundantly clear that the young master is not playing around. Veridon advises Jim not to act too rashly, because anything that happens between them right now could end up blowing back on their clans and causing an incident. But Jim Racandle isn't scared of something like that. After all, they were both mature individuals here. Would their fathers involve their respective clans in a simple fight like this one? They'd probably just pay each other off with gold or something. Veridon chuckles and agrees with the young master. Moreover, it looks like he's learned something useful from this interaction, and offers to repay the debt later. But Jim Racandle wants his debt paid now. He would like Veridon and the rest of the Zippels to get out of his sight and refrain from disturbing his party until the teleportation gate is activated. Veridon is appalled by the audacity of this young brat, but at the same time, something about the young Jim Racandle gets him very excited. Perhaps they could become friends down the line. Or better yet, they could be life-sworn enemies. Jim Racandle is disturbed by Veridon's strange behavior and wonders if the rest of the Zippel is as crazy as this. Soon, the teleportation gate makes preparations to teleport. The entire room is flooded with a powerful blue aura, and a deep humming burns from the very center of the tower. Right before they get teleported, Veridon insists that the two will meet again someday, but Jim Racandle is already over this meeting. He hopes such an incident will never occur. The teleportation is complete, and Jim Racandle is greeted by a man named Pedro, the second-place housekeeper. He welcomes the young master and his party to the main castle, Garden of Swords. The man named Pedro escorts the young master, Jim Racandle, through the sacred estate. Scattered on the lawn of the main castle were several swords and outlandish weapons buried in the ground. These items were not ornamental, for they represented the valiant contributions of each member in the Racandle family. All those who had achieved great feats in the family were invited to bury their swords into the lavish lawn of the Racandle house. For a while, this was Jim Racandle's dream in his past life as well. But that was just wishful thinking, and this time, Jim has decided to live a vastly different life from his weak persona. It seems other members of the Racandle family are awaiting them at the main entrance of the castle. Jim's other, Black Panther Rosa Racandle, greets her youngest son, while Chiron wonders again where the yellow-eyed cat on his back had come from. Jim explains that he had collected this stray cat, and Chiron is satisfied with his choice of words. For a Racandle, collected is more appropriate than finding or picking up, because they were a conqueror family in their blood. Rosa Racandle requests the name of the stray cat, and Jim gives the name Butterfly Racandle. Some of the loser brothers cause a stir because apparently, it's a big deal for an animal to bear their family name. Chiron Racandle demands an explanation, and Jim does an excellent bout of ass-kissing his father once again. Jim explains that since the cat is his property, he felt liable to give it a name of significant importance. After many warnings from his father, Jim accepts that he would pay the price of his actions if anything were to befall the cat known as Butterfly Racandle. Chiron points out the fact that Jim has an uncanny ability to make enemies with his loser siblings, and Jim Racandle simply assures him it's because he's the main character of the story. Chiron is satisfied with the young master's cheekiness, and warns the other siblings that things are about to get interesting around here. For years have passed, and Jim Racandle is now 14 years old. He concludes his training session with a knight from the castle. Although Jim Racandle wants to keep going, the lazy knight encourages him to take it easy and become a freeloader like him. Besides, Lady Luna Racandle was supposed to train him later that day anyway. The knight invites the young master to eat, but young Jim Racandle doesn't want anything to do with this freeloader and his other siblings at the breakfast table. Later, another knight brings Jim Racandle some food. The name of this knight is Bellup Schmitz, who belongs to the low-ranking class of knights. The knight known as Bellup is about 13 years old and quite weak. In fact, it was widely known that Bellup was about to become disqualified from the cadet group if his weak performance kept up. This is probably because of the damn hair covering his actual eyes, and Jim Racandle wonders when Bellup will become an important side character. Bellup opens his mouth to do some ass-kissing to the young master, but Jim Racandle stops him. Jim had had enough of this ass-kissing. Although Jim himself was a professional ass-kisser to his father, this was just too much. He advises Bellup to comport himself with more grace and dignity, so others don't keep looking down on him as much. After all, Bellup was still a Rukandal cadet. He had passed very difficult exams to get here in the first place, which meant he was at least different from other 13-year-olds on the outside. But what worries Jim the most about Bellup was his contradictory personality. You see, in Jim's past life, Bellup had eventually become a cold-blooded killer when he achieved the status of a bodyguard knight. Eventually, though, Bellup had offed himself on the spot. Jim Rukandal was not going to let that happen in this new world. He had to watch Bellup and prevent him from getting disqualified at all costs. In the halls of the main castle, Jim Rukandal checks the statistics of his abilities. He estimates that the current rate he's going, he might actually become a 3-star knight in about 2 years, but there was something else he had to accomplish before that. At the end of a training ground, the Lady Luna Rukandal awaits the young master. She is ready for their training session that would be just like yesterday's. Just before they begin, Lady Luna instructs Jim to use the technique she taught him from the previous training. This was the technique he had to master before he could become a 3-star knight.